Webcams in Deadhorse show the weather's looking pretty good there, so we're just waiting for the weather to clear en route. So it looks like the helo is still on the ground, Jeremy.
Yeah, the weather in Deadhorse looks pretty nice. It's hard to sit here, especially looking out the window.
Yeah. So right now, the helicopter isn't here in Barrow, so we're still waiting for the helicopter to fly from Prudhoe out to Barrow, which is about 2 hours along the North Slope coast of Alaska.
Barrow is just located on the border between the Chukchi and the Beaufort Sea, so whatever side the wind comes from causes the moisture to come up from either one of those, so we have very rapidly changing weather here.
He's made several attempts so far, but each time he's had to turn around due to deteriorating conditions.
The weather here is characterized by low fog and whiteout snow conditions. Whiteout is an area where you might have visibility, but there's nothing to look at, so you can't see anything, and it's very bad, dangerous conditions. Airplanes can really easily fly into the ground because there's nothing to look at.
He's described flying into a whiteout where he loses the horizon.
Depending with the wind shift, you suddenly can get clouds building up very fast, and the vice versa happens, that it's cloudy and foggy and suddenly it clears up real quick, and that's why the weather here is pretty fickle.
We're sitting here pretty much all ready to go. Our equipment is already staged in the hangar. So as soon as he sets down and we refuel, we're planning to be able to take off again straight away and get out onto the sea ice to do what we came here to do.
These are a GPS, basically there's a GPS unit in the middle of this white foam package. So we have two-way communication with these little foam balls, basically. And the purpose of the project is to test them to see if their battery length is long enough, see if they're reliable enough so we can put out a lot of them and start making small-scale measurements of ice deformation. This is how it comes. You open up a box and out pops this foam float, basically. So in order to activate it, you just pull out this magnet and then it starts transmitting. It's got a satellite transmitter in there, just like a satellite phone. The motivation behind this Ice Tracker project was to basically test or verify that these very inexpensive ice drifters would be able to accurately track ice motion.
The forces involved in this can be tremendous. It's the wind acting on the ice, sometimes over hundreds of kilometers, can generate a lot of surface stress on the ice that can push two ice floes together with an almost incomprehensible amount of force. If you sit there and try and picture how many of the world's largest bulldozers will be required to create the piles of ice that you literally see everywhere all around you, it's a mind-boggling and humbling terrain to be in.
We wanted a technology that was easily deployed by first responders. In case of an oil spill in the Arctic during drilling, you could go out there with a helicopter or a fixed-wing plane and throw these things onto the ice. It'll tell you where the ice is. What you can start doing from that is, if you put a bunch of them out, then you can start telling how different pieces of ice are moving in different directions.
So this is the 16th year that I've been coming up to Barrow to study the sea ice. And that means I'm now, in many ways, coming back to see friends who I know, people who live here in Barrow. And we rely on a lot of the local expertise to help us decide which are the important scientific questions. And in many cases, we go out onto the ice with local residents to learn about the ice from their perspective. We're often accompanied by a local ice expert who acts as our guide and our bear guard. I have never failed to learn something new when I go onto the ice and talk to people who depend on this ice for their living and their livelihood. They have a different way of looking at it. There's a lot to be learned by sharing time on the ice with the people who live here in Barrow.
This is an extremely important technology as more and more people start to work up in the Arctic. So you get more shipping, you get more oil development, and so you get more chance of a spill. In order to be able to respond to it, you really have to have technologies like this.
As a field scientist who has to go out onto the sea ice to get his data, we're at the mercy of the weather. We're prepared for that. We come here expecting to be able to kill some time while we're waiting for the helicopter. So if you're coming to the Arctic, bring a good book.
this way. Push, push, push.
Good aim for shooting out of here, let's say 9 onward, sometime like that.
Okay.
Meet here at 9.
Meet here at 9.
Yeah, we can
that's
meet
good.
here at 9 and go over the plan.
Yeah.
When I tell you it's okay to open up the door, you open the door, and then you hold on
Okay,
to
so
the door
strap
here,
in, hold on.
and get the buoys out.
So you got a buoy next to you there, Jeremy?
Yeah.
All right, I'll get in the co-pilot seat. So I'm just going to be holding the door.
Okay.
It looks like you've got.
Yeah, I think this will work well. Isn't that?
That's just sort of a safety measure, right? So yes. Yeah, exactly. I'll hold the door.
Is it a stupid question? But if you're landing on the ice after you've dropped the buoy, why are you actually dropping it and not just putting it
This
down?
is exactly what I wondered.
We want to.
This is part of the test.
It's part of the test.
Yeah. We're checking whether we can
Whether you can drop them.
and whether they survive, and then we want to get
It wasn't
information.
a stupid question, but
Yeah.
We call them ice trackers. The ice tracker project was to basically test or verify that these very inexpensive ice drifters would be able to accurately track ice motion.
Ready to go, Jeremy?
We put them in the mask of the GI's sea ice radar, and we're hoping to tag features that show up in the radar and then track them after they go outside of the radar mask. And so then you learn about the fate of the ice. If you deploy them in clusters, you can do what oceanographers do with drifters, which is basically to look at how the ice breaks apart or how it converges, convergence and divergence. I'm an oceanographer, so I look at the currents under the ice. And one of the things that I saw when I was doing my PhD that was intriguing was that we saw these small-scale perturbations in the flow field in the ocean. And that was probably related to the ice, and we saw some evidence of that with some very fine-scale radar data analysis from a satellite. But we couldn't really get a handle on that because the radar data is so expensive to acquire that it was really limiting. And it's also very intensive to process. So we wanted a simple solution to those issues.
So there's a lot of planning that goes into a field campaign like this. To some extent, we got quite lucky this year. The old multi-year ice that is something we try and look for was very close to the coast, and we used satellite data to guide areas that we wanted to hone in on with the helicopter, and that allows me to give the pilot some waypoints in the GPS. And then from the air, of course, we get a great view of the sea ice and the layout of it. And we can identify different regions of ice that allows us to pick a suitable ice flow in which to deploy our buoys. This year we deployed 10 buoys in 2 clusters of 5. And by placing clusters of buoys very close to each other, separated roughly by 10 kilometers, and in the vast Arctic Ocean that really is very close to each other, it allows us to look at small-scale differences in motion as different parts of the ice accelerate relative to other parts. We put 2 sets of buoys out in more or less perfect pentagons. And because the ice wasn't moving when we put them out, they remained in those pentagon shapes for a couple of days. But then just this morning, those pentagons are starting to deform. They're starting to change shape. And that's one of the measurements that we'll be making over the next coming months as these buoys continue to drift, is how has that pentagon changed shape? Has it contracted? Has it expanded? Has it stretched? Has it rotated? These are things that tell us about how the ice is responding to the wind and the ocean currents, and they tell us about the forces that are involved in breaking ice and creating open water.
We put out 2 different clusters of 5. One was kind of in mixed multi-year first-year ice, and then one was in mainly first-year ice. We targeted the multi-year ice because that's really a concern to Conoco and Shell, because it tends to be ridged, and if it comes into their working area, then obviously they don't want to be anywhere near it, or they want to have some warning about where it's going to end up. But the first-year ice, that mix of first-year and multi-year ice, is probably what we're going to be seeing in the area. At least that's what we've been seeing in the past few years in the Beaufort Sea and the Chukchi Sea around Barrow. And we expect them to move differently, so we wanted to kind of tag a couple of different types of ice and then get a feel for how they would move around. How often do you get to go out in the middle of the ocean and stand on it? And you know, you look around and there's all these boulders of ice, and there could be a polar bear behind there, and it's just a pretty cool place to be.
There's been a report of ice in the area. So this is a nice piece of ice you can see here. You can see how thick that piece of ice is. That got rafted up on top of the piece of ice that we're standing on, and that's probably about the same thickness based on the measurement we took over there of the ice we're standing on, so that gives you an idea how thick this is. And then underneath you can see these icicles hanging down, and that's brine that was contained in the sea ice that's now dripped through and frozen when it's come into contact with the cold air. And if you take a sample of that, you'll get a pretty good salt shock. The concentration of the brine in those icicles is probably 3 or 4 times what you might find in the seawater underneath us. Beaufort Sea. The runnels where it's also
Oh
dripped.
yeah, you can see where it runs down. Huh?
Yeah, yeah.
On the other side, you can kind of see some ice.
Yeah,
Looks like
indeed.
May kilometer stuff.
Pretty salty.
Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, it's a lot saltier than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, no, that's a lot saltier than the water underneath us even. So I think this is how thick the ice was basically at the end of summer. So
that's
it was.
multi-year.
This is the multi-year portion. I'll have to take the salinity measurements to find out for sure. This is the what we call columnar ice, the new ice the first year columnar ice that grew this year.
We'll be in Alaska.
But we'll take this back, we'll cut it into pieces, and essentially measure how much salt is in each piece. That'll confirm my sort of field analysis. This is the old ice that survived the summer. This is the new ice, and then we'll send it off for isotope analysis as well. 129 is the actual core length. So right now we're back here in Barrow, and I'm taking the cores that we collected when we landed out on the sea ice some 10, 20, 30 miles north of here, and I'm cutting it up into sections so that we can melt each of those sections individually and basically measure how much salt is in the sea ice, how much of the sea salt that was in the seawater originally, how much of that gets trapped into the ice. And that can tell us a bit about how old the ice is, potentially how fast the ice grew, and a lot of the other properties of the sea ice, its strength, its ability to be a habitat for microorganisms. A lot of that is dependent on the salinity of the sea ice. Getting saltier. So these are quite important measurements we're making here to be able to sort of understand more about the sea ice that we were standing on.
Since I was a kid, I've noticed the ice, I guess, quality, and I say quality because I'm an active participant in the whaling community here in Barrow, so quality of the ice is very important to us. Since I was a kid and to this point the ice quality has degraded, it almost seems impossible that we can go out during the spring season and actually harvest whales. It's getting so bad.
I've got two pieces of ice core here. On my left, this is a piece of multi-year sea ice, and on my right, this is a piece of first-year sea ice. And one of the main differences is the amount of salt that's still contained in each core. The first-year sea ice contains salt in small brine pockets, so it's actually in liquid form, dissolved still in the seawater, whereas the multi-year ice core has gone through at least one summer, and in the summertime the meltwater flushes out these brine pockets.
We used to have, in the way that scientists put it, is it's called multi-year ice, but what we would call it is called piqaliaq, and it's actually where we go to get freshwater ice, believe it or not, on the ocean. There used to be a lot more of it, and I can remember it growing up. There would just be fields of this stuff. And anymore, I haven't come across it in a number of years. All of the ice that is formed and is right off of shore now that we are actively whaling off of, or will be within the next couple of weeks, is all first-year ice. When previously it would be multi-year ice, which is a lot thicker, can support a lot bigger whale, and is also just inherently a lot safer to be on because of the thickness. It's grounded. These last few years, because the ice hasn't been grounded, I think there have been a couple of occasions where crews have been stranded out on a piece of ice because it released from what we thought to be grounded sea ice. And all of a sudden there's water between you and land, and you're in a lot of trouble.
The ice itself is a lot stronger, and so multi-year sea ice, it would be harder to drive an icebreaker through it, but at the same time it could support more weight if you want to land an aircraft on it, or again, for the locals around here, if you want to pull a whale up out of the water and you want to pull it up onto the ice, this type of ice, the piqaliaq, the multi-year sea ice, that can take a lot more weight.
The reason why ice thickness is important is because it establishes your limits for maybe how big of a whale that you can actually catch. If you have 3 feet of ice, you probably don't want to go trying to catch a 50-foot bowhead whale because you're not going to get it up on the ice and you're not going to get it butchered in time. But if you have 3 feet of ice, you might be able to get a 24-foot whale and get it up. That type of information is very important.
There you go. Okay. So I put it on my boot because I don't want to get snow on the bottom of the sample, because then if we're measuring salinity, we can contaminate the sample. That's so close to being the whole core, there's just a little bit of ice left in the hole, I think.
Andy's group, they have that Barrow Sea Ice radar. We use that for work every day, and throughout the whaling season, we'll just look at it. At least coming into work when there's no lead, we'll turn on the Barrow Sea Ice radar and see if it's moving or if it did open up. And then usually I lose all my staff because they all want to go whaling.
When the ocean is first freezing over, you've got this kind of soup of ice crystals in the upper part of the ocean. They float to the surface and they congeal, and they form this granular. There's lots of bubbles and inclusions in this layer. Once this solidifies, it kind of caps the ocean. You get less wind influence, less waves. You have a much quieter regime underneath the ice. The rejection of salt from between the ice crystals creates a constitutionally supercooled layer underneath the ice, so any crystal that's vertically oriented and sticking down into that layer grows faster than the rest.
When we're just sitting there, is changes in the weather. Wind, you watch the ice as it's floating by, and you're watching what direction it's going. It kind of tells you which way the current's going. If you have a west wind, you know that the ice is eventually going to come back in, so you're not going to be able to stay out very long. If you have an east wind and it's very strong and you're on the lead, but the wind is blowing 25, it's probably not safe to be right on the edge because that stuff may or may not break off.
Can you see this feature here? If you come over my side.
Yeah.
So this is a dendritic brine drainage channel. As the ice is expelling the salt from it, as the ice cools down and brine volume decreases and the pores constrict, you get expulsion of brine within the ice, and that is what's happening here. This is a channel that's formed. You can see all these like branches feed into one main channel, and so that channel then more or less terminates here at this frazzle layer. And there's actually some indication it carries on, which is pretty interesting. From a biota point of view, that's important because that's how they're going to exchange nutrients with the ice underneath. From a oil percolation point of view, that's clearly not a barrier to percolation. Oil could migrate all the way up through that.
When we're out whaling and we're utilizing the skinned boats, we're sitting there on the ice edge, and you try to pick spots through experience, you know, that they surface around. Sometimes it's what we call the kangehluk, where the ice edge is kind of like a half moon type shape. Or you go up to Nuvulak, where you're on a point where they'll pass the point, and they'll usually surface close to that and go. A lot of it is chance. A lot of it is experience and kind of knowing where to set up your boat based on the different ice conditions.
Things happen, ice moves in ways that we don't understand. And we actually have been active in involving local experts, getting their understanding. They're the people who are going out this time of year, not always rescuing people, sometimes they're out hunting in these conditions. And they have their ideas about how the ice and the currents interact and what makes the ice move. And so we have a very integrated system of observations with, you know, technological moorings and radars, but also very fundamental knowledge from people out there living their lives among the sea ice.
A lot of times when people come and talk to me and, you know, you go whaling, that's so awesome, you know, they're really excited. And to me, I get excited about whaling, but it's just what I do. But there's something about sitting there next to an open lead with a little bit of wind blowing. Everybody's completely quiet for the most part. It's a real spiritual connection when you're just sitting there and you're waiting. And there's absolutely nothing else going on but that. That is the goal. You sit there and you be quiet and you wait. And it sounds really boring, and it might be boring to some people, but it's one of the greatest joys to me.